has been. You're talking, laughing, connecting. Things are finally flowing beautifully between you and him. And just when you start to believe it might actually turn into something meaningful, he pulls away. The messages slow down, the affection cools, and suddenly you're left wondering what went wrong. You're talking, laughing, connecting. Things are finally flowing beautifully between you and him. And just when you start to believe it might actually turn into something meaningful, he pulls away. The messages slow down, the affection cools, and suddenly you're left wondering what went wrong. Many women experience this shift and take it personally, has been. But what's really going on often has much more to do with what's happening inside him than anything you've done. Men sometimes retreat, not they don't feel something, but because they feel too much and don't know what to do with it. At the core of this behavior is the fear of losing freedom. Many men tie their sense of identity to autonomy, to the ability to choose their own path without constraints. As a relationship becomes serious, it also becomes more real. Real expectations, real responsibilities, real emotional investment. And to some, that feels like pressure. Suddenly, there's a fear of losing the parts of life that give them a sense of control or spontaneity. Time, space, goals, independence. That fear isn't always conscious, but it triggers a pullback, a need to feel grounded again in their own world. In addition, a serious relationship forces a man to confront his emotional depth and readiness. When he starts thinking long-term, it brings up deep psychological questions. Is this the right person? Am I enough for her? Can I provide what she needs? What if I fail? If a man has unhealed wounds from past relationships or carries self-doubt, this pressure can lead to a sudden withdrawal. It's not always about you. Often, what's the apology? It's about the internal reckoning he's having with himself. Sometimes men pull away not to walk away, but to process silently and figure out what they truly want. And yes, in some cases, it's a test. Conscious or not, a man may want to know what happens when he steps back. Does she panic? Does she chase? Does she stay calm and confident? That emotional feedback tells him a lot about the bond you share. In the end, if he's right for you, he'll return not out of guilt or confusion, but because he feels safe choosing you. And if he doesn't return, it's not a loss, it's clarity. Because someone who's right for you won't pull away from depth, he'll lean into it. Apology has been. Men are always taught how to process strong emotions. From an early age, many are conditioned to suppress rather than express what they feel. So when a relationship begins to deepen and the emotional stakes rise, it can trigger unfamiliar territory for them. The feelings might be intense, affection, vulnerability, even fear. And because they're not used to handling that emotional load, they often take a step back. This isn't always a conscious decision. Sometimes it's a survival instinct, a way to regain emotional control when things start to feel overwhelming. As the relationship progresses, the apology has been, emotional intimacy demands that both people show up with openness and honesty. But for someone who has spent most of his life pushing emotions aside, this kind of closeness can be terrifying. He may start to feel like he's losing control or that he's not equipped to meet the emotional needs of the relationship, has been. Rather than admit that, he retreats. It's his way of self-regulating. of creating space to think and breathe without having to explain why he's suddenly distant. In this phase, many women begin to question themselves. Did I say too much? Was I too available? Did I scare him off? The truth has been, when a man feels emotionally overloaded, it's rarely about something the woman did wrong. It's about his inner threshold for emotional connection. And until he builds the tools to sit with those feelings, rather than run from them, this kind of behavior may repeat itself. The deeper the connection, the more pressure he feels to be emotionally present, and that can trigger a cycle of withdrawal. What's important here is understanding the difference between a temporary retreat and a pattern of emotional avoidance. Some men do return after this emotional pause with more clarity and openness, having sorted through their thoughts and fears. Others, however, remain stuck in a cycle of pulling away whenever things get real. In those cases, it's not your job to fix or teach him. Your job is to honor your emotional needs and recognize when someone isn't ready for the kind of connection you deserve. Sometimes, when things begin to feel serious in a relationship, there can be a quiet but significant clash in emotional timing. You might be emotionally ready for the next step, whether that's defining the relationship, becoming exclusive, or planning a future together. You're feeling a natural progression, a deepening of the bond, and it feels exciting, comforting, and right. But for him, it might feel quite as natural or timely. He may still be in a phase where he's assessing, thinking once has been, or simply not yet sure he wants the next step to look like. This doesn't mean he doesn't like you or that he isn't interested. In many cases, he genuinely enjoys the time you spend together and values the connection. But when he senses the emotional current picking up speed and heading toward a more committed space, it may trigger a quiet internal panic. Not necessarily because he doesn't want a relationship, but because he doesn't want to feel rushed into something before he's mentally and emotionally aligned with it. That disconnect between your pace and his can make him pull back, hoping to create space to catch up emotionally or to avoid making promises he's not ready to keep. When this happens, it's easy to take it personally. It can feel like a rejection or a sudden shift in interest, but often it's not about a change in feelings. It's about his relationship with timing and readiness. If he feels that the relationship is moving faster than he can process, he may withdraw to slow things down in the only way he knows how, by stepping back. This retreat is his way of buying time, has been not necessarily of walk-in or would-they. It can feel exactly the same in the moment. Has been. Understanding this doesn't mean you should around indefinitely. Emotional pacing matters in any relationship, and two people don't always have to be on the exact same page, but they do need to be reading from the same book. If a man needs space to think or process, that's okay, but you also need clarity and consistency. A temporary gap can be navigated with communication, but if his internal timeline keeps pushing the relationship into limbo, it may be time to reassess whether his pace is truly compatible with yours. When a relationship starts to become serious, it often triggers a deeper, more personal reflection in a man. Apology has been. He may begin asking himself questions he's never had to confront before. Am I the kind of man who's ready for this kind of commitment? Can I truly offer someone consistency, emotional presence, and a shared future? These aren't surface level thoughts. They go to the core of how he sees himself and what kind of life he's prepared to live. This process can be uncomfortable, especially if the answers aren't immediately clear. For many men, committing to a serious relationship in just about being with someone, they see it as stepping into a new version of themselves. That version might involve being more responsible, more emotionally open, or more future focused. These shifts can feel like pressure if he hasn't already imagined himself in that role. Rather than rise to meet the new version of himself, some men step back to evaluate whether they're ready to grow or if they're still holding onto an older version of their life or identity. This kind of inner conflict can be subtle and hard to express. He might not say anything directly. Instead, he might become more distant, cancel plans, or stop showing the same level of interest. It's not necessarily that his feelings have disappeared. It's that he's caught between who he is right now and who he's being asked to become. That tension makes him pause, reflect, and sometimes retreat in order to protect the sense self he's always known. Unfortunately, from the outside, this looks like coldness or disinterest. But what's really happening is a personal identity crisis, one that's quietly playing out while you're wondering why everything suddenly feels different. If he has the emotional maturity to recognize this shift and move through it, he may come back with more certainty and commitment. But if he resists change or fears what growth might demand of him, he may choose the comfort of his old life over the unknown path of a deep relationship. When a relationship begins to feel serious, many men consciously enter a phase of deep mental evaluation. Everything might have been going perfectly. There's chemistry, emotional connection, and mutual attraction. But suddenly, his mindset shifts. He starts asking himself questions like, is this really the person I want to be with long term? Or can I see a future with her? This isn't because something went wrong. In fact, this process often starts precisely because everything feels so right, and the seriousness of that truth forces him to assess things on a whole new level. During this time, his mind begins scanning for flaws, not in a critical or cruel way, but in an effort to protect himself from making the wrong choice. He may begin noticing things he never gave much thought to before. Maybe it's small habits, values, communication styles, or future goals. He's not trying to find a reason to leave, rather has been. He's trying to make sure he's not ignoring red flags or settling into something that might later fall apart. This is where the emotional retreat can begin. He needs space to think, to weigh the emotions against logic, and to answer questions he can't always articulate out loud. What's hard about this phase is how it impacts the other person, has been. From your perspective, it may seem like he's pulling away without explanation, creating emotional distance just when the relationship seemed most promising. You might start doubting yourself or wondering if you did something wrong. But this internal assessment often has nothing to do with your worth and everything to do with his need for clarity and certainty. It's a deeply private process, and many men don't even realize they're going through it until they've already created space. If he's emotionally mature, this period of evaluation can lead to greater commitment and emotional depth. He might return with more certainty and stronger intentions, having reassured himself that you are the right person. But if he's unsure or unwilling to face those questions honestly, he might stay distant or drift further away. Either way, this phase is less about you proving yourself to him and more about him learning what he truly wants and whether he's ready to receive what's in front of him. When a relation shifts from casual connection to something more defined, it can sometimes start to feel like pressure rather than passion. In the beginning, everything feels light and exciting. There's freedom in getting to know someone, in choosing to spend time together without any expectations. But as emotions deepen and labels start to form, the natural dynamic of desire can subtly transform into a sense of responsibility. For some men, this change brings on a quiet resistance, even if they genuinely care about the person they're with. What was once a spontaneous connection can start to feel like something he has held to maintain has been, rather than something he's naturally drawn to. He may begin to feel like he's being measured on how often he calls, how much time he spends, or whether he's giving enough attention. These expectations, even when unspoken, can create an internal narrative that he's falling short or not showing up properly. When that happens, the excitement starts to fade, replaced by a sense of duty. And when love begins to feel like a checklist, it's not uncommon for someone to instinctively pull away to escape that pressure. This isn't about being unwilling to commit or incapable of love once the apology has been. It's about how his emotional system processes closeness and structure. If he starts to associate the relationship with obligation instead of joy, his instinct may be to step back and protect of himself that feel free and self-directed. He might not even realize he's doing it. He just starts to feel off, less engaged, less drawn in. And in trying to preserve his sense of autonomy, he distances himself from the very thing that once excited him. Understanding this pattern can be difficult, especially if you're left confused about why the energy suddenly changed. But it's important to know that desire thrives in freedom, not pressure. When a man feels that the relationship is still a choice, not a demand, he's far more likely to show up fully and willingly. The key is not to chase or try to prove yourself, but to remain grounded in your own sense of worth. If the connection is real, he will return, not because he has to, but because he genuinely wants to. When a man begins to feel a deep emotional connection, it can stir up feelings that have nothing to do with the current relationship. Instead, they're rooted in his past. Old experiences like being betrayed, manipulated, abandoned, or even just misunderstood leave emotional imprints that don't fully go away unless they've been acknowledged and healed. So when a new relationship starts to feel real and serious, those past experiences can rise to the surface, sometimes without him even realizing it. He may begin reacting to you based on pain from someone else, not because you've done anything wrong, but because his brain is trying to protect him from feeling that same hurt again. This often plays out in the form of emotional withdrawal. Just when you start opening up and building something meaningful, he becomes quieter, more distant, or suddenly uncertain. It may seem confusing, especially if things had been going so well. But in his mind, the seriousness of the relationship has triggered a defense mechanism. His subconscious starts whispering that getting too close might lead to pain, that if he lets someone in too deeply, he risks being hurt like before. So he pulls back, not to hurt you, but to shield himself from a fear that may not even be fully conscious. Unfortunately, this kind of emotional pattern can create a cycle. A woman senses his distance, so she reaches out more, tries harder, or gets anxious. That can make him feel pressured, which only reinforces his fear and confirms his belief that emotional closeness leads to discomfort or loss of control. This isn't about blaming him for his reactions, but it's important to understand that until someone recognizes and addresses their emotional wounds, they often repeat behaviors that keep them from the very intimacy they crave. Healing these patterns takes time and self-awareness. Some men are willing to reflect, seek help, and grow through the discomfort of facing their past. Others continue to run from it, repeating the same cycle in every relationship. As someone who loves or cares for him, once the apology has been, you can offer compassion and patience, but not at the cost of your own emotional well-being. You deserve a relationship built on clarity, safety, and emotional presence, not one shadowed by someone else's unresolved pain has been. Sometimes, even when a man truly likes you and enjoys the connection you share has been, he begins to feel a quiet but powerful fear that he may not be enough for you. This feeling doesn't always stem from anything you've said or done. Instead, it often comes from his own self-doubt, his worries about his career, finances, emotional readiness, or ability to be the kind of partner he thinks you deserve. As the relationship gets more serious, these fears can grow louder in his mind, creating a sense of pressure that he might know how to express. In moments like these, he may start to question whether he can truly meet your expectations. He might admire your strength, your goals, your emotional maturity, and start to compare it with where he sees himself. That internal comparison can lead to feelings of inadequacy, and instead of being inspired to rise to your level, he might feel discouraged. The fear of disappointing you or not living up to what he believes you want can push him to take a step back, thinking he's saving you from future heartbreak or frustration. What makes this especially difficult is that he may never verbalize these thoughts. To you, it might feel like he lost interest or changed overnight, when in reality, he's dealing with an internal storm of insecurity. Rather than have a vulnerable conversation, he chooses to protect both himself and you in the only way he knows, by retreating. Unfortunately, that retreat often causes more confusion and pain than any honest admission would have. Understanding this fear of inadequacy can help you see that his withdrawal isn't always about a lack of love or care. Sometimes it's about a lack of self-belief. But even then it's not your job to prove his worth to him or to shrink yourself to make him feel more comfortable. A healthy relationship requires two people who feel secure in themselves and are willing to grow together. If he isn't ready to believe in his own value, no amount of reassurance from you can fix that. It has to come from within him. In today's dating world, it's easier than ever to believe that there's always someone better just around the corner. Social media, dating apps, and constant exposure to other people's highlight reels create an illusion that we're surrounded by endless possibilities. Some men begin to internalize this belief, and when a relationship starts to feel serious, instead of leaning in, they begin to question whether they've explored enough. The idea that committing to one person might missing out on something else, even if that something else doesn't actually exist, can trigger hesitation. This grass is greener mindset isn't always a conscious decision. A man might truly enjoy being with you, feel emotionally connected, and even see potential for something long-term. But the moment things get serious, he begins to feel like the window to explore is closing. Suddenly, instead of focusing on what he has, his attention shifts to what he might be giving up. It's not necessarily about other women. It's about the fear of finality, the worry that he'll look back and regret settling down too soon. That fear can lead him to emotionally distance himself, not because there's a problem in the relationship, but because he's stuck in comparison. He starts to think in what ifs and maybes, imagining all the things he could be missing. This fantasy of infinite options can be incredibly persuasive, especially when commitment starts to demand real emotional presence and effort. He may pull away not because the relationship isn't good, but because he's afraid that good might not be good enough in the long run. What he doesn't always realize is that constantly chasing the next best thing often leaves him empty. Real connection, deep trust, and lasting intimacy don't come from keeping all your options open. They come from choosing someone fully and showing up with intention. When a man understands that commitment isn't about limitation, but about depth, he stops fearing what he's giving up and starts appreciating what he's building. Until then, he may continue running from commitment, not because he hasn't found the right person has been, but because he hasn't yet found peace with his own choices. Sometimes when a man pulls away, it's not because he wants to end the relationship, but because he's unconsciously testing the emotional strength of the bond. He may not even realize he's doing it, but something inside him wants to see how the relationship holds up when there's distance. It's a way of observing your reactions, your emotional state, and how secure the connection really is. He might want to know whether you'll panic, chase him, grow resentful, or whether you'll stay grounded and composed. This kind of behavior often stems from his own uncertainties or past experiences. If he's been in relationships where emotional intensity quickly turned to conflict or pressure, he may be wary of repeating those patterns. By stepping back, he watches how you respond. Do you maintain your own emotional balance, or do you spiral into fear and overthinking? To him, your response can become an unspoken signal about whether this relationship feels emotionally safe or whether it's likely to become unstable under stress. While it may seem manipulative or unfair, it's usually not intentional or malicious. It's a subconscious defense mechanism, has been, a way for him to protect himself without having to voice his concerns directly. He may want to feel reassured that the connection is resilient, has been, that it doesn't fall apart at the first sign of emotional discomfort. Unfortunately, apology has been. This approach can leave you feeling confused and unsure of where you stand, especially when there's no clear communication about what's really happening. The key to navigating this kind of emotional test is to stay centered in your own self-worth. If someone pulls away to test you, it's not your job to prove your value or to chase after them for validation. A healthy connection is built on openness, not hidden experiments. When you remain calm and confident in the face of distance, you send a clear message that your sense self isn't dependent on someone else's emotional uncertainty. That kind of stability is powerful, and often it's what makes the other person realize the true strength of the bond.